Welcome to Tia Sarita's Storytime. Today we will be reading George the Bilby Chef and the Raspberry Muffin Surprise by Jedda Robaard. This is George. George is a Bilby who just loves to cook. George wears a puffy hat and an apron with countless pockets. In his apron, he always carries a spoon, which is very handy for taste testing. George can cook just about anything, but his favourite recipes of all are for sweet things. Muffins, biscuits and cakes of every sort. George adores them all. George loves to sing as he works. He can often be heard down in his kitchen singing one of his made-up songs, most of which are very silly and make no sense at all. Today is Betty Echidna's birthday. Betty is one of George's best friends, and George wanted to bake her something special. George browsed thoughtfully through his library of recipe books, and then he found just the thing. Betty loved raspberries, so George decided that a raspberry muffin would be perfect. He wrote down the ingredients and then set off to gather them. But there was one big problem. George didn't have any raspberries. He didn't even know where the raspberry patch was. Little Bee was flying home from collecting pollen when she saw George walking around in circles. It was funny to watch, but made Little Bee dizzy. She zoomed down with a loud buzz and landed on George's shoulder. "George, where are you going?" she asked. "Oh, Little Bee," said George, happy to see his friend. "I don't really know. I can't remember where the raspberry patch is." "Silly George," Little Bee said with a laugh. "You're nearly there. Follow me." Little Bee flew in front to show him the way. The raspberry patch was huge. George, being a Bilby, couldn't reach any of the berries, and Little Bee, being a little bee, couldn't pick them. George sat beneath the raspberry patch and tried to think of a plan. "A ladder?" suggested Little Bee. "No," said George. "A ladder will be too heavy. I think we need something that floats." "Or flies," said Little Bee excitedly as she jumped up to greet another friend. Maggie lived just next door, high up in her neat little treehouse. She was always ready to lend a helping hand, or, in Maggie's case, a helping wing. George described the special treat he wanted to make for Betty's birthday. Maggie liked Betty very much. She also really liked the idea of raspberry muffins. Maggie flew up and shook the raspberry bush as hard as she could. Down tumbled the blueberries, plop, 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 plop. George was so happy that he started to sing one of his made-up songs. "Raspberry, raspberry, red and sweet, how very lovely you are to eat." Before he could start another verse, Little Bee pointed out that they had another problem. All of the juicy raspberries had rolled beneath the bush. George scrambled after them when he heard a grumpy voice. "Well, I will never get these stains out of my rug." "Oh dear, it's Bert," said Maggie with a sigh, "and he doesn't sound very happy." Out popped Bert, covered in raspberry juice. Some of the ripe raspberries must have tumbled right into his house. Little Bee laughed so hard she gave herself the hiccups, which made everyone else laugh, even Bert. George quickly explained to Bert what they had planned for Betty's birthday. Bert was a very tidy mouse and liked things just so. He could be a bit grumpy, but he was really a very nice mouse, and Bert always enjoyed a good party. Bert had a tiny barrow that he used in his garden, which fitted one raspberry perfectly. Bert rolled out the raspberries one by one. George took 2, and Maggie carried the rest in her shopping bag. Little Bee led the way again as George sang another of his ridiculous rhymes. Raspberry, raspberry, red and bright, how you gave Bert a terrible fright. They laughed and sang all the way back to George's house, except for Bert, who didn't think that the song was very funny. Maggie, Little Bee and Bert helped to get the house ready. Maggie and Little Bee attached the streamers while Bert rolled out the plates. Word got around and lots of other friends came to help too. George's parties and his delicious baked treats were quite famous. George finally had all his ingredients and went happily down to his kitchen to cook. He sifted the flour and measured the sugar, cracked the eggs and melted the butter, and finally added the juicy fresh raspberries. George whipped up the raspberry muffins in a flash. He popped them into his huge oven and waited while they cooked. When they were ready, he placed them in his special basket for taking things up to the top room. He called out to his friends above to wind the handle, and up went the basket. George ran up the stairs. He put all the muffins on the plates and made everybody hide. Just in time. Betty arrived to a very loud surprise, with all of her friends wishing her a very happy birthday. Betty gave George a giant hug. She was delighted and very excited because raspberry muffins really were her favourite thing. George the Bilby Chef and the Raspberry Muffin Surprise by Jedda Robaard. And that's the end of story time with Tia Sarita for today. Make sure you subscribe and like my videos. Thank you for visiting our channel. Please check out the other videos that are on the channel. There's lots of other different books. Until next time, keep reading along with Tia Sarita Storytime. Thank you for visiting. And remember what Dr. Seuss said. You can find magic wherever you look. Sit back, relax. All you need is a book.